Okay, so welcome everyone to the last session of our new work on Roma religion series, which has been really stimulating, very interesting. I personally learned very much and I enjoyed all the presentations and the discussions after the presentation. So it's been really, really a wonderful experience. And the last session of our seminar, we are very pleased to welcome Jörg Rüpke, who is professor at the University of Erfurt in Germany and is deputy director of the Max Weber College, also in Erfurt, which is a leading center for the study not only of Roman religion but of I would say, religion in general in the world. He is now in charge of the project founded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, Religion und Urbanität, urban religion. That will be the subject of his paper today. He studied in Bonn, in Tübingen, and in many other German universities, but he has been also visiting professor in many other universities and countries, such as Rome. Last year, we were very pleased to have him in Rome to give lectures to our students and colleagues. He was the principal investigator of the ERC Advanced Grant Lived Ancient Religion. And among his books, I will mention only his books, because if I start mentioning also his articles, it will take too much time. So among his books, very important, The Religions of the Romans, the Religion der Römer, Di Fasti Sacerdotum. I think we have all used that for many times, an amazing work and working tool at the same time. He edited the Companion to Roman Religion. He wrote From Jupiter to Christ, the Roman calendar from Numa to Constantine, lately Pantheon, a new history of Roman religion, as a first outcome of his project, HRC project. Lately also the English translation of his Domi Militiae, War and Peace in Ancient Rome, was published, another very important book. And last year, I can mention Religion and Its History, a Critical Inquiry, published in England. So we are very, very pleased and honored to welcome Jörg here. And the title of his paper, as I've already mentioned, is Urban Religion. So, Jörg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Yeah, depending on where you are, good afternoon, good evening, or good early afternoon to all of you. What I will try to do in this time slot allotted to me is not any attempt to summarize these fascinating topics that have formed the sequence of this seminar, and about which I have been informed and reminded every week. But unfortunately, that is I mean, Tuesday is that day in the week that is most difficult for me. But so I'm glad that I can be here today and try to offer something new, even if it is not totally new, but it's an attempt to, against the background of, as you will see, long established discourses, long established conceptual frameworks in the study of ancient and in particular Roman religion, that I will propose to you to use the concept of urban religion. in a evidently somewhat critical move against the well-established term of civic or polis religion. So what I will try to do is to use this perspective opened up by urban religion to map the different forms of religious practices and the permanent and temporary spaces created by such practices, as well as some religious institutions and architecture. I will discuss the role of religion and its employment by different groups of actors for the integration, coherence, and the administration of cities. And this is what in other contexts I've been using, or we in this research group at Erfurt, of which I'm part, are using thematized as urbanity. But I will not go deeper into that concept today, but will rather address the use and development of religion for competition, for stabilizing differences and transgressing also local identities. I will argue, and that is this critical move, that the dichotomy of public and private is not helpful to grasp the complexity of the phenomena. And instead, as I said, I propose to use the concept of urban religion as an umbrella term for studying urban-induced change. And now I use this function of sharing my screen and hope that this is working. So its concepts, after a brief introduction of the concept of religion, the concept of governance, a very broad concept of governance of urban religion that tries to integrate but also move beyond and too narrow elite focus. I will briefly review of how religion is filling and shaping urban space. We'll think very briefly about flows made by religion, and may skip at first long-term changes, but if time suffices, will also point to this in the form of a conclusion. Understanding the urbanization wave of the late Roman Republic and imperial periods means as much as, for instance, in ancient Central America, to understand, and here I quote anthropologist Carballo, how larger numbers of disparate people integrated themselves into much larger and denser settlements than existed previously, and how they differentiated themselves in the ways that define urban societies, such as status, occupation, and as social groups intermediate between households and cities. Again, as everywhere else, religious practices and beliefs in the Greco-Roman world had a role in such integration and differentiation. It is the how in which certain urban networks in certain periods differ from other in this use of religion. But to look into such differences makes only sense if these are differences within a common concept, within a take on religion that makes religious practices and beliefs in Roman antiquity somehow comparable with what can be addressed as religion in other ancient cultures, and even today in cross-cultural perspectives. So you see, I stick to this term of religion. And for this purpose, religion is understood here as human communication with superhuman agents located beyond the here and now, but at the same time relevant and made relevant for and powerful in the here and now, gods, demons, dead ancestors, and such like. This communication is risky with regard to the addressees, who, for instance, might not hear, as much as with regard to the fellow humans who might deny the usefulness, the legitimacy, or even the relevance of this communication, or even the existence or willingness of the addressees, the gods often. Giving that communication material form following traditions, doing it invisibly or in monumentalized form, reduces or overcomes such risks. It is not as such, but in its specific forms that religious practices and the imaginations implied or consciously expressed in them turn out divisive or integrative, creating bonds between or even producing family, neighborhood, associations, city quarters, or even polity and their respective members, or drawing boundaries between them. Religion in the Greco-Roman cities, and you see I move into a critical part, has not always been seen in such complexity. In a tradition going back to the 19th century, interest in the state, interest was on state religion, as in Visova, performed by the leaders of the polity, magistrates, and public priests, and only in following their practices, their rules, and their selection of deities by everybody else, on behalf then on the polis or civitas. Greek polis religion, as much as Roman civic religion, thus focused in this perspective on religious integration of cities, stressing the public rather than the private, or the integration of the urban and the countryside rather than their differences, stressing polis not astu, civitas not urbs. These are useful models for some purposes, but they overlook the strategic intention of the ancient concepts they re-employ. In the ancient Hellenistic world, the clear spatial separation and economic relationship of exploitation from the side of the city inhabitants and rulers was deliberately obfuscated by a polis ideology. Restricted to a minority of people enjoying full citizenship, the unity of these was stressed regardless of whether they lived or worked in the city or countryside. In the Roman case and Latin language, publicus covered the domination of what was to be regarded as shared, as commonwealth, by those elites who engaged in a process of state formation in competition with other such states. Certainly, religion was of use in these strategies too, and we need to keep this in mind. Apart from that, however, the concept of urban religion offers a broader concept of looking at integration and differentiation within a single city as much as between cities in urban networks. The point made could be clarified by looking at the governance of religion in Roman cities. Legislation, even in a wider sense, on religion is rare before late antiquity, when persecution and restitution, rivaling religious groups and the reach of their internal jurisdiction had to be defined. Typically, local rituals, one-off or repeated, that made use of publicly governed space or fiscal resources were regulated by decrees of city councils or the emperor. The general populace of the Gallic Narbo obliged itself to dedicate an altar to the Numen Augusti and to regularly celebrate there on certain dates in 11 CE. The city council of Pisa obliged a committee and those who would like to do so on their own account, privatim, to perform certain rituals in honoring the recently deceased Lucius Caesar. The Roman Senate made decrees about the ritual program of the secular games of 70 BCE, and all these moves then lead to publicly displayed reminders, acts of communication, as you can see here. With regard to local regulations, legislation produced at the imperial center confirmed local practices urged for the local regulation or explicitly refrained from regulation with regard to religious matters. The Lex Coloniae Juliae Genitivae Ossonensis of 44 BC, here displayed, ordered the new city council to decide about a minimum of religious festival and games, the institutionalization of two basic priesthoods, augurs and pontiffs, and to make sure that other religious initiatives did not intervene with the administration. Such decisions could lead to the establishment of a new ritual practice, but city councils did not vote about the creation of a new god. A god taken along as booty by a Roman general could be given a plot of land in the city of Rome for a new temple from the treasure. The transformation of a dead emperor into a good god could be officially acknowledged if sufficient witnesses were available. A cultic practice, a priesthood, a sanctuary could be forbidden, never a deity. There was no urban pantheon that was the result of legislation, even in many instances, and you see this frequently in museums, there are arrangement displays of what is supposed to be the local pantheon. Amid the many documents from Roman towns, not a single list of those gods whose cult was financed or co-financed from taxes is known, even if we know that such subsidies were given in many cases. The only possible exception is perhaps the list for a military unit, the so-called feriale durano. There were other forms of governance, if we understand it in the wider sense of, I quote, a process of coordinating actors, social groups and institutions to attain particular goals, discussed and defined collectively, but in fragmented, uncertain environments. Tradition was an important concept here, but of fluid content. Claims to define it, to define mos maiorum, for instance, were traditionally made by local elites, but Rome's so-called cultural revolution extended the role of claim makers also to intellectuals around, but also distant from the emperor. Thus, the amazing diffusion and continuity of religious signs, above all deities, which I treat as religious signs, was mostly due to images and practices using images on dedication slabs, mural walls inside and outside of shops and houses, and last but not least, in monumental temples. Artisans working on the basis of what they knew could copy from their shelves or a nearby tomb or other monument, or found in pattern books had brought Hellenistic and Eastern Mediterranean images to Rome and diffused Mediterranean imagery far into the Western and Northern provinces. Routinization and standardization allowed for recognition as well as for individual variation. Processions carrying deities and their symbols on stretchers, as displayed here in Praeneste, through the street were a common sight in Mediterranean cities and confirmed such knowledge gained otherwise. Further mechanisms accrued. Luxury laws, as witnessed in early 2nd century BCE Rome, restricted personal ornament of family celebrations, but not expenditure for religious infrastructures and gifts to the gods, if we accept gifts to the deceased during the funeral. A political philosopher like Marcus Tullius Cicero proposed to give the control of all private religious practice to public priests in de legibus, but such ideas remained systematizers' fantasies. Their existence was bookish, which I tried to present here. Unfortunately, the authoring of books clustered in very few cities. As a consequence, for most cities, the archaeological and epigraphic record cannot be supplemented by such sources if the place did not figure in accounts produced in the urban centers of Rome, Carthage or Alexandria and Antioch, and very few provincial towns. Within such a framework, some religious groups and many priesthoods were legally and functionally just like associations, such groups, collegia. Some religious groups drew up their own regulation. Typically, their textual production were minutes rather than prescriptions, documenting membership, largesse, and precedence. Letters by the emperor or another absent member could be added to such archives. Treatises by Marcus Brutus on augury, fictitious dialogues by Marcus Tullius Cicero on the nature of the gods, collections of letters by St. Paul in the 1st or Quintus Aurelius Symmachus in the 4th century would aim, at least geographically, at wider audiences. Literary discussion of rituals, divine names, or the suitability of certain sacrifices were, however, definitively a part of religious, what I here call governance, of self-assumed, not attributed, and by far not top-down attributed religious authority. As a consequence, the latter such authority was widely distributed and highly fragmented, allowing bold statements as much as alternative claims. Given the wide diffusion of religious signs and practices, knowledge could only theoretically be restricted to local authorities, as Varro's model of Theologia Civilis tried to think through. The religious knowledge embodied in traditional, local, urban practice. Even in Varro's model, however, it was just one type of theology, along with the knowledge production of philosophers and, of course, less reliable, but more attractive poets. Cities were embedded in much wider circulation of religious knowledge. If not bolstered by local social standing, religious experts would point to their Etruscan background at Rome as analysts of entrail, or their Chaldean backgrounds as astrologers. Foreign language, technical apparatus like here, liver models, or for astrologers, astrolabes, books, mathematical knowledge, or the use of hieroglyphs in the case of the priests of the Egyptian gods and goddesses would prove such claims. Such religious specialists were also subject to market mechanisms. There was, however, not a unified market for religious services. Some were offered to individual clients according to needs and financial means. At Rome, for instance, rather cheap diviners were to be found around the Circus Maximus. Likewise, more expensive one for the middle class, as described by the mid-1st century Christian era Juvenalis. Care for the future, the need to decide without sufficient knowledge, was important for the elevated political actors, the emperors, as it was important for everybody else. Some had their own astrologers, others would rely on some wise woman around the corner. Practices like the latter left no sources apart from the terms for the male and female sacerdotes, the diverse type of priests and priestesses. As a Roman magistrate would make sure to be supported by a pontiff for convincing public prayer performance, a female precantor would be hired for a funeral in the public of a neighborhood. After one's own transgressions, a specialist for expiation would provide ritual redress. Festivals would necessitate special offerings, above all cakes that were provided by other types of female priests and bakers. On the highest social level, priestly expertise and ritual performance was based on social status rather than proved knowledge or economic success. Contrary to the logic of the election of annual magistrates as starting position for the entry into lifetime membership of city councils or elevated functions during that membership, Priesthoods were in most cases lifetime positions from the start. Status and family, and only sometimes political experience, were stressed by the recruitment from certain elevated social groups via recommendation and cooptation. Specifically, religious authority was produced by collegial decision rather than by individual learning. At times, surprising in its details, it was basically a performance of the independence of the gods, of their divine will and agency, correcting or reducing political decisions in details only, as long as elite consensus was stable. If religious actors, and I'm turning to the question of filling space, if religious actors and practices did not change politics in Roman cities, they were nevertheless not unimportant. Most of what was called public was framed by religious activities. If religion was important for the city, it was so by providing distinction, visibility first. Many religious practices were directed towards the ground, throwing gifts into pits, letting blood flow or drift to the ground, pouring liquids on the ground. The corpses or bones of ancestors, the daimones, the good gods to be, were interred. For the elevated religious actors, the direction was up-facing. The most widespread type of Roman temple had an enormously high podium, a small platform, as you know, in front of the temple, often including an altar. Here, visible performance took place in which only a few could actively participate. The rest was reduced to the role of spectators, even listening in vain if the distance was too large. Many religious events were of that kind, temple-based rituals, typically at least once a year at the very place. At Rome, where we can follow developments for nearly a millennium, such places and occasions multiplied. For the growing cities, new rituals were invented on the basis of originally very different practices, races in the circus, from the 3rd century onwards on stages of theaters, and finally, the ultimate Roman ritual entertainment, the amphitheater. Far more people could see, hear, enjoy what was offered here to the gods, and who were those organizing the gift and the spectacle. This was immediate distinction, less a long-term investment in the form of temple that might need years even before completion, but could present the name of the donator for a few generations until ruin or rebuilding. Many events were one-offs, not to be repeated every year, and featuring the unexpected rather than the traditional. At Rome, during the 1st century CE, several annual games of 7 or more days each were held in most months from April to November. Games for Mater Magna, for Ceres and Flora in April and early May, for Apollo and for Caesar's victories in July, the Roman games in September, the games for Divus Augustus and the Fortuna, who had safely led him back in October, as the games for the Sullan victories, and finally the plebeian games in November. Many of you know even more and the lists in more detail. In the course of the imperial period, further games were added and only few were dropped. Already the opening by a big procession across the city mobilized spectators. The rituals were not focused even to these last stages that I just showed in the form of theaters and amphitheaters that spread throughout the empire. Roman type theaters allowed for 1,000 or more spectators. Circuses and amphitheaters in provincial towns could often accommodate numbers equivalent to the majority of the inhabitants. Scenic games initially featured Greek-style drama, tragedies, and comedies adapted to Roman subjects. They were more and more supplanted by mime and pantomime. Circus games would feature a series of car races on the same day. At Rome, usually the last 3 or 5 days of such games. Exceptionally, the Ludi Floralis featured animal hunting in the circus. Whereas the emperor came to hold the monopoly of the organization of such games and the big patronage roles altogether, individuals even outside priesthood and magistrates could acquire and secure their status by sponsoring such events, and even more the localities for them, massive architectures that often did not find space enough within the city wall. That these urban societies, and this is important for this urban religion perspective, were multifocal, is reflected in the many temples, often scattered across towns and clustering in more than one location. It is above all currently important political symbols that were prominent around the political center, the forums, in many cities of the Western Empire. In the imperial center, Jupiter featured here, altars and temples for Divus Augustus or divinized emperors. Peripheral and suburban sanctuaries could focus on deities with Roman or local names, in both cases developing hybrid concepts, images, and architectures. In terms of urban time, well documented for the city of Rome, it is interesting to see that around 40% of these temples, if we focus on the late Republican and Augustan period, that these temple had their annual celebration of their foundation in the month of June and August, nearly empty of standing games. This type of religion is spectator-centered and open air and well aware of an urban economy of attention. It is the house or neighborhood-based celebration that fell during the winter month, Saturnalia, Calenda Januarii, Compitalia, Feralia, Matronalia, the first two among the most popular festivals throughout the western part of the empire. The epigraphic festival list of the Venetian Guidizzolo list for the second half of the year, named Apollinaria, Neptunalia, Diana, Vulcanalia, and the Septimontium, all in July and August, and then the Saturnalia and the Festival of Epona in December. The strange omission of imperial dates in that list suggests that those were communicated by ways different from a house calendar, perhaps by announcement of a city administration, which did not care about these other events and their ritual performances, but perhaps also by some college that cared for these cults. Also at Rome, many religious activities were not coordinated with big temples and publicly announced dates. Many individual religious activities were not interested in high visibility vis-à-vis humans. Several temples kept possibilities for votives in forms of pits, provided water or featured trees to be admired rather than climbed upon. For the meeting of smaller groups, some temples provided additional spaces, but for many purposes, specific architecture was erected and entertained. Mithraea were the inversion of the podium temple. Mithraea were the inversion of the podium temple. Raised were the banks for the participants, the ritual actors were on the ground floor. Visibility was not given to those outside a small group, even if some Mithraea were not hidden away in the underground. Along the roads leading into the cities, many tombs offered spaces for family banquets, sometimes allowing to provide food to the recently deceased family members. These were not conceptualized as cities of the dead, necropolis, but as individuals or families, religious places, loca religiosa, sacralized by the presence of dead bodies. This sacral character was an individual decision and act, but legislation was unanimous that everybody else had to respect such an inalienable character. My account given so far might have created the impression that religion was basically some fixed sacral landscape, a monumentalized mental map informing or supplementing urban infrastructure of markets, roads, and water lines. Nothing could be further from the truth. If I quote, cities are distinguished from other human settlements by two key features. They constitute dense and large clusters of people living and working together, and they are the focus of myriad internal and external flows. And if this is what makes cities uniquely active and vibrant places that are always more cosmopolitan than culturally uniform, if this is true, the successful spread of religion by cities points to a massive role of religion in producing such flows. Walls, the paradigmatic static element in many Roman cities and in all Roman minds, offer a good example. Even in comparison to major temples, walls were the most massive, demanding and costly building in or around and sometimes far around cities of the late Republican as well as imperial period. Varro in mid-1st century BCE associates munire fortifying and mönia walls with the idea of civic duty, munus. Labor invested in a town's wall is the fundamental expression of a citizen's communal obligation. In his treatise, Varro adds a historical claim about earlier ritualizations of the founding of cities in Latium, namely a practice supposedly established by the Etruscans. An oxen and a cow drove a plug in such a way that the plug creates a circular furrow. The earth thus excavated is thrown into the interior, thus forming a miniature wall. The ritual had been described already by Cato the Elder. When the Emperor Commodus planned to refound Rome as Commodiana in 192, he issued an aureus showing himself as Hercules cutting the sulcus primigenius round the imaginary city. As we learn otherwise, there is a further detail to the ritual. The walls, described as heated sanctus in legal discourse, are not impenetrable in daily life, for the plough is occasionally lifted, portare, as to leave space for gates, porte. Religious narrative and maybe even practice is mobilized to enable flows, making walls canalizing, not blocking traffic. Sanctuaries inside or outside of gates further mark these points of transition. But above all, sanctuaries produce flows far beyond the building phase, implying transport of materials, sometimes luxury materials from far away, and of ideas. Where the city walls are acting as a line of practical and conceptual divisions, religious opportunities and obligations invite and necessitate crossing. The most important family shrine were not the small domestic mural altars, but the extra-urban family tombs. Roman women held a long-distance procession to Diana at Lake Nemi, despite the fact that a large Diana sanctuary was present on the Aventine. Roman magistrates met with the representatives at old and sometimes even fictitious Latin communities on Mount Albanus for praying to Jupiter Latiaris, or went to Lavinium. The Dea Dia cult of the Arval Brethren at the 5th milestone on the Via Campana forced members of the uppermost echelons of society to spend several days in May outside of the city. The focus on such an agrarian deity by the political elite was, however, rare and probably just an outcome of a period of early Augustan religious reforms that tried to embrace as many features of religion in a new Augustan framework. On average, political actors were focused on divinities associated with power, order, and protection, in the long run obfuscating the clear military association of names like Mars or Victoria. Despite the continuous reliance on agricultural production Even in the closer surroundings, a megacity like Rome did not remove agrarian-themed cults, but did not broaden them for further prominence either. Religiously instigated external flows were, however, not only outgoing. At Rome, the large games had been regional attractions right from the beginning. Even if privileged seating was given to Roman citizens, who need not to be inhabitants of the city, I remind you, the spectacles were appreciated beyond. Calendars featuring the urban dates were present in many towns in central Italy. Competitors from neighboring cities or embassies enjoying spectacles were part of political networking on regional as well as imperial level. The various games also drew specialists from singers, performers, and dramatic producers through gladiators to technicians of permanent or temporary architecture for naval battles in the arena of the amphitheater, for example. Military booty from robbed religion, images, votives to captives flowed into Rome in triumphal processions. Games added exotic topics and animals. As simple a ritual as a sacrifice invited the company of incense bought and brought from the eastern margins of the Roman Empire. Internal flows were not less important. Religious practices brought families, slaves included, on a domestic scale together, friends for shared prayers, drinks, and meals likewise, as documented in many literary texts, Ciceronian dialogues or Horatian songs. Upper-class priesthoods frequently had no building of their own, but met in private houses, engaging in culinary competition that brought peacocks and mural eels onto the tables. People from a neighborhood met at crossroads shrines, sometimes just painted on a wall, sometimes architecturally articulated, well documented for Rome and Pompeii, but certainly to be found beyond. Again, it is not the religious imagery, but the religious occasion, citywide dates like the Compitalia, that produced flows across not only rooms, but walls and streets. At Rome, a historical layer of further topographical segments that we see articulated only in religious activities, that is, flows, coexisted or predated the get-together of compita and vici, of neighborhood and quarters, namely curiae and hills, montes. If we can believe the ancient historians' accounts, during the neighborhood festival, freeborn participants were represented by puppets, but slaves by balls. Coming together was an occasion of integration and distinction at the same time. It provided the practice and opportunity of both. With such a perspective, we can return to the level of the city as a whole, to urban religion. The same held true here. Circuses and theaters were spaces, or more precisely, ritualized opportunities of coming together and interacting. No doubt, the central role was arrogated by and attributed to the sponsor, and mostly identical, the magistrate leading the ceremony. Yet agency was also arrogated by the spectators. Their applause forced actors to repeat lines and scenes. Their support, cheering openly or cheating secretly by means of magic, made a difference to the outcome of races. Their reaction to what was offered by the patrons was a political fact which could change careers and political courses. And vice versa, the input side, the extraordinary, the best, the thrilling competition, the extravagant expenditure, spread by rumor and historiography, produced personal support and political consent, not unfailingly though. Religion, and I come to my conclusion, was not opposed to politics and not identical with politics in Roman cities. Nor was it public or private. It was consciously employed and unconsciously functioned as a tool of integration and differentiation. It enforced and mitigated the hierarchy of Roman towns, which were characterized by competing land-based elites, ultimately under an imperial and distant overlord, by visitors and just temporary stayers. Religious service providers and textile production led to further forms of religious authority without, however, seriously challenging political authority and the emperor, if not in secrecy or from a distance. Personal uncertainty and health problems beyond birth and death were not restricted to, but intensively made a topic in an urban religion that developed sanctuaries providing such services also beyond the city walls. These were hallmarks of urbanity in a religious perspective, joined by monumental temples, circuses, theaters, and amphitheaters. Of course, this very package could also be rejected in its entirety by an anti-urban city dweller like Seneca, the philosopher, or by anti-Roman post-urbanists like the Jewish authors of the collection of the Sibylline oracles, not to be mixed up with the urban pendant, the Sibylline books, newly collected and censored by August the Emperor. More dangerous, probably, in the long run was a development in many cities of the Roman West that concerned the very foundation of the urban fabric and its urban religion, namely the withdrawal of members of the land-based elite to rural seats and their abandonment of civic display in urban space. Of course, this changed the phenomenology of urban monumental religion and prestigious consumptions in the form of festivals and games, rather than to shift interest to agrarian deities or invest in priestly roles. In many cases, it went hand in hand with the demographic shrinking and even the disappearance of towns in the Western Empire. Religion and urbanity, urban and religious flows went hand in hand, upwards and downwards. Both would reappear in very different forms in medieval Western cities, but this is a very different topic that is also part of a story and history, or the analytical usage and suitability of this concept of urban religion, but it is with the city of Rome, with these many actors and the many locations and flows that I tried to bring together under this umbrella term, that I wanted to dedicate this talk. And I simply stop here, thanking you for listening so far, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Thank you for this very, very interesting and broad presentation. Before opening the debate, I'm sure there are many, many questions. And before, I would like to only ask you a very general question about your project. Of course, you are a leading expert in ancient Rome. The very word urbanity now comes from urbs. So it's very well, it's a Rome and its empire. It's a perfect example for your project. I would like to ask you, since this is a bigger project involving other people, I saw just now on your side that there is a call for application fellowships. There is a workshop tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and there are other participants. I see a blog post on Erfurt Squares. I would like to ask you how something more about your equipe, your research team. What kind of other topics are you dealing with? How do you cope each other with in this focus on your urbanity and religion and so on?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. thank you very much. I mean, I try to be short on this to allow anybody to formulate their question. But I mean, as you have seen in my, I mean, I stick to Rome, but from time to time I try to point out that this is, I mean, first of all, that we should not or even must not isolate, I mean, Rome or any other city in such an analysis. I think that this is very, very important, synchronically, as well as, of course, in any longer diachronic perspective. What we I mean, the setup of this project is certainly a comparative setup, and basically it has three regional and chronological foci. So the one is the ancient Mediterranean world, let us say, I mean, around the coasts of the Mediterranean, from early Iron Age into late antiquity, and then moving without any conceptual break into our second focus, that is then medieval and early modern Europe, let us say Latin, so Central and Western Europe. And then we also consciously have a third extra-European, or deliberate, I mean, even more extra-European focus, and this is South Asia, mostly India, I mean, Pakistan, yeah, here without a clear chronological focus. So there are among the fellows, the visiting scholars, occasionally people dealing with ancient India, so from period of historical cities, so let us say roughly contemporary to the Roman Empire, but most of them are rather from the 16th century onwards until today. So this is the comparative setup, and now on the conceptual level, Rome is a gift and a curse. I mean, it's a gift because and not least due to a long and old sustained history of research. We know such a lot of it. We have so many sources. But at the same time, one has also to say that, I mean, we read all, I mean, as you know, I mean, we all are faced with this challenge. I mean, we read every single ancient word in the light of 2000 years of a history of reception. That if it's younger than the 19th century, we call academic or research. But in a way, I mean, this is part of an ongoing history of reception. And let us say this already, just to take one example, and then I stop. So, I mean, you know that, and this is even more Roman than Greek, this focus on the character of a city, or city being a legal state. So you are, you know, a municipium iuris Latini or colonia civium Romanorum, etc. I mean, so this focus on a legal state, which of course is as much a tool of local elites as the desperate attempt of a pre-modern extended empire to control at a distance that cannot be bridged by, you know, internet or not even, you know, telegrams or railways. So I mean, this has been the blueprint for then many. I mean, the concept of what is a city, a ville, or however you call it, a Stadt, throughout the medieval period, and then is more or less without any critical reflection, has been made in people like Max Weber and his famous Die Stadt, the city, has been made as the criterion for a definition of what a city is. And I mean, this is dominating a literature that then tries to come to grips with, let us say, settlements of 10,000s of people where you cannot archaeologically identify a marketplace or a town hall, and you know that this is reigned by some feudal lord, some 100 kilometers away. And so the clear result is, no, that's not a city. I mean, unfortunately, 100,000 people had to live there, but evidently it's not a city. And so these are the these are the challenges in such a project.
Are there other questions? I see there is a question in the chat. Now I can't read it. By Gabriel. No, sorry. I can't read this. Okay. Gabriel, yes. Thank you very much, Professor Rüpke, for the wonderful presentation. I would like to make a question. When you spoke about the female sacerdotes, you mentioned the precantatrices, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
As priests called for funeral ceremonies. This made me curious. Once these women are often portrayed negatively and not as social important religion professionals in poetry and other literary sources. Do you think there are divergences between this literary representation by the authors and the perception of these professionals by other citizens? If so, which factors, social, intellectual, etc., could help to explain this divergence? And are there other documents where we could access these other perceptions?
Yeah.
If you need to read it again, it's...
No.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a very important question, and in a way, I mean, illustrating and tearing out one important focus gender here of this. I mean, of our indebtedness to gender biases in a very long history. I mean, starting with mostly male authors, not exclusively, but mostly male authors in antiquity, and also a dominant research tradition. I mean, if you see not photographs, but I mean, paintings of sometimes you see these on the walls of universities or departments, of the faculty of previous decades, and above all previous century. I mean, the 19th and 20th century. I mean, these were male enterprises, so I mean that I briefly hinted here at just half a page in a way, or a page in my book Pantheon, where I tried to see, I mean, what do we know about ancient female priests? And if you look hard, you will see that in the lexicon of Festus, for instance, there is quite a number. So you can draw a comparatively long list of female religious specialists, but unfortunately, we know nothing about them because historiography didn't bother to do more, and Festus was excerpted by Paulus, etc., etc. So we are faced with this. I mean, we are faced with the bias situations of sources already, and I mean, all what we can do is then to think about these titles. What do they imply? What are they pointing to? And then draw our, I mean, model understanding, draw our conclusion. Just two remarks. One I gave in my presentation. bakers. So whenever, I mean, if you look into the Latin lexicon, there is astonishing term of different names of cakes. So they had, you know, apple cake, cheesecake, Blackwood forest cake, and you know, dozens of other types of cakes that were employed in rituals. And I mean, whenever you see any reference, you see that females, women were the specialists for producing these cakes. So you should, by every logic, I mean, you should come to the conclusion that women must have had an important role in these rituals. But no, I mean, you don't see it in many ancient sources, and you see this problem of the sources reflected as being, I mean, the full reality in our handbooks. I mean, a second example, which I think is even more telling, is about textiles, which are even less frequently preserved. I mean, on every, and I mean, take this image that I mean, the interpretation of which I ended, you know, with this many people, and which I simply used, you know, to convey this idea. There is a self-reflection of life in cities, that many people are doing diverse things. But I mean, in many descriptions, you see that the most important things are not some diadems or some rings, but it's about textiles, you know, luxurious textiles, clean textiles, etc., etc. And I mean, from whatever we know, is that women produced textiles. So again, the most important status markers, the most important ritual ingredients in rituals were produced by females. And again, it's, you know, we don't learn anything about it. I mean, we read about Phidias producing, you know, a cult image, and so. And again, I saw, or you know, about the poor slaves who had to kill the bulls. But just again, it's evidently our source basis cannot adequately reflect the complexity of religious and economic practices, and resulting prestige also of gender roles. And so, I mean, we should read our Odyssey and, you know, think about the role of Penelope. But I mean, that's not what we do in thinking about ancient Roman priests.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. There are two questions, one from Ismail and one from Claudia. I don't know who wants to raise the hand before Ismail. Okay.
Okay. It's an honor to hear from you, Professor Rüpke. And thank you, Shen, for your seminar. I would like to ask two questions, if you don't mind. First question, you spoke about the effort of Roman elites to expand their cultural dominance, especially over the cities. How do you see the influence of the central Roman power on religious practices in the most remote place of the Roman Empire? For example, in frontier zones such as Hadrian's Wall area, right? And second question, do you observe significant differences between the religion lived religion in those areas and in the cities of the central regions of the empire? If yes, what differences?
Yeah, thank you very much. Like Gabriel's question, that is, I mean, right to the center. Perhaps not of what I have presented, but I mean, of what is important in approaching ancient religion. Perhaps let me I mean, this is also taking up, this is not what you have asked, but you know, I use or misuse the opportunity to bring this on the table, which was a bit implied in Giorgio Ferri's first comment. So this I mean, it's not only about center and periphery on what you have just focused, but there is also this element of big city and small city implied here. And I'm adding this because it's conceptually very challenging discussion in our own research group. So and this in a way is connected to the two terms of urbanity, which is including the claim of, you know, in German you don't make this English difference between small towns and big cities. It's just Stadt, and Stadt could be small and Stadt could be, you know, a megapolis. So, I mean, there are also linguistic and cultural priming of certain research questions. Now, I mean, with urbanity, the claim is that even in smaller towns, you see already being reached a degree of complexity that leads to not just a quantitative but a qualitative change in social relations and the complexity of social setups. The difference or the contrary, the alternative to this is connected. What colleagues at Regensburg work upon is what they call metropolity. So that is that the important cultural innovations are made just in certain cities, and it's by, you know, by the central position of these cities. So there is lurking central place theory in the background. So it's about the central place of these cities that then make them also successful of spreading their models to others, so that you know, there is yeah, an interest in copying these things, and so you have a process of diffusion from these centers. Now, I mean, there is no doubt that this process of diffusion and a trickle-down effect and effect of imitation from top to the bottom in social terms within one urban set, within one city, but also within one larger network of cities in the Roman Empire, from the center to the periphery. But at the same time, I mean, it's what I try to stress time and again. So you might remember that I always talk about integration and distinction, standardization. I think that was a term I didn't use. Homogenization and differentiation, distinction. So I think in all societies, these are working together at the same time, but evidently, and here we come to the qualitative difference. I mean, if you surpass surpass a certain size and come to a larger settlement where people are aware that this is a unified settlement, but also it's a distinct and larger settlement than other settlements, so distinguishing between rural villages and something urban, then this gains new qualities with, much more conscious efforts at not just, social control as in villages and big families, but it's a conscious effort at administration on the one hand, but also a conscious effort at hiding of distinction, of differentiation. And now I come, sorry for this long introduction, I come back to both of your questions in a way. And this is why I would like to stress, you know, both. I mean, this effect of, I mean, offering models, trying to implement these models, the interest of local elites to distinguish themselves, to stabilize their position by, you know, tapping into central resources by using those signs, nice letters from the emperor, you know, nice whatsoever what they think or claim is from Italy. So on the, I mean, on the Eastern European border in Dacia, for instance, you see a lot of Egyptian cults, always connected with the claim, you know, this is from Italy. So that there might be even, I mean, it's not about any, it's not about substances, but it's about associations and charging of signs. But of course, it's, I mean, it's also the higher officer that is claiming some authority vis-a-vis his veterans or soldiers by pointing to his relationship to the center. And so your second question about the lived religion, I mean, in a way is that, I mean, there are differences, but at the same time, I mean, due to the fact that this type of distinction, homogenization game is even sharper in the center, I would like to stress that even, you know, you remember these, I mean, even bronze and lead tablets of laws are in a way expression of lived religion, you know, produced at certain points in time and certain social constellation where you think, you know, you need to claim authority, you need to make your point by producing such things. And I mean, so often it's so astonishing to see that a certain type of text, a certain genre, which should be present, you know, thousandfold in the evidence, you know, is to be found only once or twice. And then, you know, we should harder think about it and not just claim that 999 copies have been lost. I know that's, you know, a different, difficult, methodologically difficult claim, but I think it's a reflection we need to make. I hope that, you know, is at least addressing the core of your question.
Claudia.
Thank you.
Thank you for this brilliant talk. And I think we could see the complexity and multiplicity of your current collective project, isn't it? So there were some attempts to address the question of urban religion before your article with Emiliano Urciuoli. I don't know if I spell correctly. And especially your book, of course, 2 years ago, developing this concept and giving it more, how can I say, turning it more strong and so on. And especially focusing on lived experience of individuals and groups, etc. But I am particularly interested in the second part of your book, the part, David, thinking religion, of course, because the intellectual dimension of religion for a long time was marginal, I suppose, in the scholarship of Roman religion and so on, etc. Especially Cicero, Cicero's De Natura Deorum, and especially the Divinatione, for example, in which the book 1, in which Quintus presents a kind of building the city by through examples in divination and so on. So Cicero addresses another other authors 5 points on urban religion. So could you please talk a little about the intellectual dimension of your project or your collective project Not because it is more important or more relevant, but I think, I suppose, it is more difficult to realize for historians to realize the material culture. No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I mean, I would even love more to hear you about the importance of the intellectual, talk about the intellectual dimension of Roman religion, than listen to my own what I'm going to say. So we must find an opportunity for that, Claudia. I mean, you and you is really now in the plural. I mean,
just in your project. I refer to the mention in the project.
In the project, yeah. So I think I mean, within the larger setting of the project, specific agenda of Emiliano and me, and others also, is that, I mean, normally if we think about, I mean, the study of the urban is the study of the urban space. You know, from the critical, you know, from the spatial turn onwards. And of course, I mean, we would all quote, you know, Lefebvre, etc. And then, you know, pointing out it's not space, it's culturally produced space, it's lived space, it's experience space, it's conceptual space. But, you know, we turn the page, and the next what we see is a map. What we see is a nice picture of a monumental temple, you know, as I have had on display, etc., etc., etc. So, and in a way, I mean, it's easy, and you know, I have fallen prey in my, you know, in thinking about illustration. I mean, it's much easier than to display this material side, you know, even in terms of books and so on. So this is a temptation. And I also, I mean, I will not deny that that we have overlooked this spatial dimension. But now, I mean, if we think about city, we can easily, and this is permanently at Erfurt a discussion. I mean, how can we avoid that we, you know, speak just about religion in the city, so that we again presuppose, really speak about a given space, a given monumentalized, built up space, and then talk about what is going on in the space. But really think about, you know, how is, I mean, it's not, we must not take for granted that this space, these, you know, 100,000 insulae and camere and villae are a city, but it's discourses that turn spaces into something so specific as a city. And I mean, these discourses, we as historians can typically only or nearly only grasp by studying ancient texts and textual evidence. And then, I mean, it's easy to say, okay, all these texts were written in cities, so this is all urban. I think that is, I mean, this is too easy, and it's just, I mean, in a way, circular. But really going to these texts and looking, I mean, looking hard at where they not only, I mean, sometimes they talk about, you know, you check the text, and which is so much easier with digital editions, you know, and find, you know, here it's Urbs and there's Municipium, etc., etc. But to find out where are, let us say, normative claims about city. I mean, Cicero talking of urbanitas is basically a talk to say 900 900,000 out, no, even 990,000 out of 1 million Roman inhabitants are not urbani at all, but just displaced rustici. So, I mean, these are the interesting things, or, you know, these utterances to say, you know, what is urbanitas? I mean, urbanitas is to go to my rural villa where I'm far off the noise of the city and finally have the time to think about, you know, God and the city. And, you know, so it's these are the I think the challenges to find out. And I mean, this is, and I think that, I mean, new concepts and new methodology, I mean, they are not in a way not better, not right and wrong, but it's about seeing new things that we have overlooked so far, that we detect new facets that, you know, might be more relevant for other issues, or even for historical reconstruction, or for contemporary issues. And I think I stop here, but this I see is the methodological challenge. And, you know, this is why I would like to, you know, try to share some of my enthusiasm for the topic with you, in order to, I mean, to make you work and you know, to use your insights and knowledge of these texts to, you know, come to findings that I'm overlooking.
Thank you, Jörg. There is a last question by Eduardo Pino. I don't know if he would like to put him himself, or I should read it. I would encourage you to take the opportunity to put questions directly to break the wall of Zoom chat. But if not, I would read it.
I can try.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to make you a question. First, thank you for the lecture. It was a great opportunity for us. And secondly, I'd like to question about something I read in an article of Greek historian Speros Virionis, associated with the decline of Roman culture and the Roman religion during the crisis of the 3rd century. Were those religions, particularly the Roman and the Greek, civic religions, connected to the polis, and during that period, cities shortened drastically in Western Roman Empire. Can we establish a connection between Roman faith and urban culture, and relate one's decline with the wane of the other?
Yeah. I mean, thank you very much. I mean, the short answer to this question is, I think, no. I mean, there is certainly, I mean, if we talk about civic religion, we focus on, I mean, as I tried to show, we focus on just one segment, one layer of ancient religion, and that is to say, on one layer of religious practices being performed in urban spaces, and this is the practices of an elite, not even all elite practices, but the practices of an elite that is addressed at this enterprise of ruling a city, of establishing, you know, something like, I mean, it's about state formation. It's also about stabilizing a competitive elite, so to find a good way of cohabitation, let's say. And I mean, in a way, it's just to spell out the evident, and in that form, it's banal to say, once these elites leave the city, these elite civic religion leaves the city too, and a certain type of urbanity, and this if I rephrase it like this, a certain type of urbanity is being lost. Now, the question of whether the status of a city is lost is now, depends very much on your definition of a city. Let me use this example to explain the difference between urban and civic religion. So, certainly, if civic religion, if the elites withdraw from cities, which is true for many, not all, for many cities in the Western Empire, there is even something like a demonumentalization of cities, which then often goes along with a reduced, what one might call, resilience of cities, so that after attack by these migrating or moving Germanic hordes, then cities are not rebuilt or rebuilt on a much smaller scale, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, you see perfectly that the core of urban practices are continued in Greek cities beyond a change from traditional polytheistic practices to Jewish and Christian, and then above all Christian practices. So this is not, and this is why Spiros Vironis, I think, focused on the Roman and not on the, doesn't make this equation with the Greek, Greek religion. Now, urban religion is not my point is, urban religion is a perspective and not a material object. So it doesn't make sense to say when the elites withdraw, urban religion disappeared from the cities. But for me, urban religion is to say I analyze religious change with a view to how urban developments change religion. So what I observe in this sense is urban religion is the very decline of some monumental, some institutions, the disuse of some places, the creation, but also the creation of, let us say, churches on the periphery, even outside of walls. So new religious centers that are serving urban populations, but being deliberately constructed outside of the city walls, which might point, and sometimes do, not always, as far as I can believe specialists, which point to the fact that another idea, another conception of the city is being developed here. So it's a perspective of observation. I need to stop anyway, and so sorry again for too long an answer, but thank you very much for the question.
No, it was very, very interesting, and I would say that we can end this debate here, and as well we can put an end to our seminar series. We couldn't ask for a better conclusion than with the lecture by Jörg Rüpke. Thank you very much again. And I would like to thank all the participants and all those who gave a paper, and special thanks to Ismail, who cared for the organization of the seminar, and most of all to Claudia, who was really the driving force. She cared for everything. Her enthusiasm was decisive in organizing this seminar series. So thank you very much, Claudia. I don't know if you want to add the last word before we.
I just want to thank you all. Thank you Jörg, Rüpke, thank you for staying with us. Thank you, Giorgio, especially Giorgio, Ismael, and hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Have a nice evening. Boa
Bye
tarde.
bye. Thank
Buona
you.
serata.
Goodbye.
Ciao.
Guten Abend. And bis bald, Jörg.
Buenas noches. I can't say this in Portuguese.
Boa noite.
Boa noite. Yeah.
Boa noite. Buenas noches. Espanhol.
And Jörg, you are warmly invited to Brazil as well.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it would be a pleasure. So let's talk about
see.
this and take a serious consideration. But
Okay.
to see Claudia on this much smaller continent again, would also be a.
Let's see. Thank you so much. Really, really thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. That was a pleasure. Goodbye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Ciao.